So thanks for coming back from lunch. And I have to say, I've just enjoyed the conversation so much for this morning. It was fantastic and incredibly insightful. So first, I'd just like to take a minute to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on. Here in Brisbane, that's the Turrbal and Juggerah people. And I'd like to acknowledge any traditional owners who are in the room or listening online. And it's actually particularly appropriate to acknowledge the traditional owners because one of the great parts of Aboriginal culture in Australia is knowledge sharing. And the knowledge is shared down through different generations. And I hope actually what we're talking about today and in the future is knowledge sharing. Data is knowledge, right? We turn data into knowledge. And so it's really important that we do that and we get it right. So a lot of what I'm going to say, you've already heard in bits and pieces. I'm going to try to give you a bit of context, the Australian context, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some details of some of the NDRI work that we did. So as you heard, Australia takes a very national approach to research infrastructure. We try to coordinate things as much as possible. Much of that is delivered through NCRIS, which Wojtek mentioned this morning. And the investments that are made in NCRIS are basically governed by roadmaps that we write every 5 years. The last one was written in 2021. And so, of course, we're currently in the process of, writing the one for next year. And that, I hope, I hope we'll get it done, to be blunt. But we'll get it done, and hopefully it'll be useful to people. So this is the 2021 roadmap. And one of the things that the 2021 roadmap said was you should establish this advisory group. I think at least one roadmap before that said the same thing. Okay? And I'll just take note, the advisory group, one of the things the advisory group was supposed to do was actually develop a workforce strategy. And I will come back to that near the end. This time, the good news was we did establish an advisory group. And it's been going for a couple of years now. It's chaired by Liz Sonnenberg, who's from the University of Melbourne, who has just done what I think is an absolutely amazing job at running the committee or the group. And importantly, it's a group of people from a really diverse set of backgrounds, some with research infrastructure backgrounds, some from industry. And importantly, all the people at the bottom are actually government people. So they're in the room when the advisory group meets and has discussions, and we, I guess, hope they listen to some of the things that we said. That's up for debate, I guess, but at least they're there and they get to hear the conversation. So another thing from 2021 was develop a national digital research infrastructure strategy. And amazingly, we did that too. Okay, so it took us about a year to write an NDRI strategy. Okay, and I will go into that in considerable detail. And then after that, we convened this working group. And that working group was really to look at the strategy and provide advice to government about where should you put your money? We've got this strategy. What investments should you make? Now look, I have to be honest with you, and I'm happy to stop if need be after this. I am not a data person. Okay, so why in the world I was chairing this group is a valid question. Okay, but just rest assured, there were lots of people on this group who knew lots about data. It was an amazing group to work with, I have to say, and I'm pretty sure I was the chair because I was the one who was happy enough to ask all the dumb questions and see if I could get an answer. Okay, and I'm actually going to try to ask a couple of dumb questions today and see maybe if you can give me an answer. Okay, so I'm not sure how well you can see this. I'm going to go into this in some detail in a minute. So the strategy basically said you should think about investments in 6 what we called outcomes or areas. I'm going to go into these first 3 in detail, so I'll just mention these last 3. Number 4 was basically compute. You need compute infrastructure, high performance computing. I'm not a data person, so that's the instrument. That's the microscope, that's the MRI. Okay. The next one was really about access. Who can log on to your instrument and who can play and do stuff with it? And the last one was about software. Okay, so that's the program that you run to collect your image, if you want to think of it that way. That's the way I tend to think about things. Okay? But like I said, I'm going to, okay. But I'm going to tackle these. Oh, hold on. There we go, press the right button. I'm going to tackle these first three because I think that's really salient for our conversations. So the first one, and I could probably stop after this one, to be honest. This is data. So this is the sample, right? Again, I'm a physical scientist. This is the sample. If you don't have a good sample, it doesn't actually matter what you do after that. You're kind of wasting your time. Okay? So we spent a huge amount of time talking about data, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that today. Okay? So it's basically all about data standards for collection, curation or preservation, and access. So we did this work about a year ago now, and I have to say I really, really enjoyed that last session because when we were having that conversation, we were saying all kinds of things like we have to have standards for metadata. We have to have some guide rails, right? I have no idea how many pieces of metadata information you could possibly write down. It's hundreds, if not thousands, right? So we have to create some guide rails to say, well, the things you really have to have in are these, and if you want to add some extras, great. And so the RIMB work looks like it's done exactly that, and I think that's a fantastic place for us to start. I don't think, hopefully Wojtek and Lisa won't get too upset if I say Australia is not there yet. So it's great to see other people doing that work, and I hope that we'll be able to build on that. We do have a persistent identifier strategy now, but again, it's a nice piece of paper, but we have to find ways to implement that. I was actually really pleased to see in the RIMB stuff, the instrument was there, right? So if you're going to have a huge database of data that you collect, it's actually really important to understand the instrument that came off and the quality of that instrument. Was it calibrated any time in the last 15 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, because if you have a big database, you might weight data more strongly or less strongly depending on the quality of information you think you're getting. Okay? So whenever I do this, I always like to pose the following question. Most of you, I assume, work in some sort of facility that collects image information. And this afternoon, you'll have people doing that, and you're going to save that data. 5 years from now, if somebody opens up that data file, will they be able to understand it? Okay? The answer to that question has to be yes, if we're going to have a database that works. And that's for people who have some knowledge in the area. What about the people who have little to no knowledge in the area? Does the answer need to be yes for them? I would argue absolutely it has to be yes for them. So if I pick human imaging out of an MRI, a clinician 8 years from now decides to download those brain images, he or she needs to be able to make sense of those to get some novel understandings. So that's our challenge, right? And that's why the metadata and stuff is so important. It has to be with the file, and we have to be able to get the data out without 3 years of effort. So our next area then was about curation or preservation. Okay, so the day you save the data has to be the day you decide what you're going to do with it in terms of keeping it. Okay, now you would argue the easy answer is, of course, we're going to keep everything forever. Okay, this morning Hillary mentioned a couple of times about sustainability. That's not sustainable, I'm sorry. Right? The amount of data is going up, the amount of electricity to keep all that data is getting outrageously expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is not the solution. Okay? So we have to start having some really smart machine-enabled logic about monitoring what the data gets used for. And then, of course, and this is where now data people start to get very twitchy, right? We're going to delete some data. Okay, and so people get very nervous. But that has to be the way we operate. We just will not be able to keep everything forever. It simply won't work. And then now we're going to talk about access. So Hillary mentioned FAIR and CARE this morning, and I just want to talk about FAIR. Actually, I just want to talk about F first. Findable. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so if I said to everybody in this room, find out what you can about Joe Shapter, what are you all going to do? You're going to pick this up and find your favorite search engine and see what you can find. Don't believe everything. No, there shouldn't be anything there. That's findable in today's world. Okay? I'm going to get out my Google or whatever my search engine is. I'm going to search, and I can find that that data exists. Now, in universities in particular, this is really, really challenging. Okay? Because most university digital systems people live in a world where data is locked down and never roams outside probably the administration building at the university, right? It's student data, it's grades, it's HR, it's that kind of stuff. So if a researcher then comes in and says, well, actually, we want to not only share our data, but we actually want to put it on a repository where anybody on the planet can search and find it. It's a very uncomfortable conversation at universities. But that is the situation we want to be in. Okay, that's what findable means. Okay, so that's a challenge. Now, you know, this morning I said about changing the culture. That's what I meant. We have to change the culture about research data. It's not ours, it's ours. Okay, and it has to be available to everybody. But there is, of course, a fair. Okay, access, I think, is critical. So most universities in Australia will tell you, of course the data is accessible. Of course, right? You know, it's accessible after a 3-month security check on the person who wants it, a letter from the Prime Minister, and maybe 2 letters from 2 vice chancellors of different universities, and then after sort of 6 to 12 months, you might get access. That's not access, all right? We want ready access so people can take the data and do good things with it. And that has to be the trust and identity piece, which is in one of the other outcomes. We have to get much better at that. Okay? Interoperable, we've talked about that. Really will all come down to the data standards and making sure that metadata is there and strong so that we can actually understand what that data means. And reusable, I think, for me, you know, people who collect beautiful images and interpret those beautiful images only do that or are able to do that because there were lots of other beautiful images that came before it, right? So data, the power of data is not in a single data piece. The power of data is in the collection of data. So we have to get into that situation where we've got a whole cohort, a whole collection of data, and that will be the most powerful use of our information that we can get. And we'll develop new knowledge out of that. So that's really important. Okay. And then finally, I do want to mention care. Okay, so there's lots of pieces of information, lots of data, which actually in Australia's case has a connection to the Aboriginal communities, and that has to be treated appropriately. I think Australia is getting better in this space, but there's still a long way to go, and of course there's lots of historical challenges that it will be very difficult to undo. But this is critical to bear in mind with all data that's being collected and archived. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So this is something I guess I was and am particularly passionate about for a whole series of reasons that I could explain at afternoon tea if you want to hear them. But this was one of the priorities for the advisory group. We have just amazing people. There are something like 2,000 people working in national research infrastructure in Australia. And, you know, they're brilliant people. And to be really selfish about it, we want to keep them all. We have to make sure that their work environment is absolutely the best it can be. So what we're doing is we sort of have a 3-pronged approach. The first part is we are hopefully going to establish what was called the UK commitment, technicians commitment. And this is very much around basically tackling the institutional level environment. So, you know, the challenges of not being able to be promoted, the institutional challenges of not getting the recognition when you made a contribution to the work, all those kind of things. So that's an institutional level, talking to the University of X about how your technical staff or professional staff employed and what environment should they be really working in. Then we've set up a thing called ACRI, okay, the Academy for Collaborative Research Infrastructure. This is essentially, if you want to think of it, the professional society for technical staff. So individual members can join this. Our role is really to advocate for those people, to provide hopefully professional development, you know, so, and a whole series of other things. And then the last part of this, and this is something I think that has decreased dramatically over the last 5 or 10 years, and it's to basically get people mobile again. So, I said at the beginning, one of the great parts of Aboriginal culture is that knowledge is shared. But one of the best ways you learn is you share knowledge. So you go to another facility for a week and you learn how they do A, B, or C. How do they archive their data, right? In a perfect world, we'll send people overseas. We'll send them to Heidelberg, right? And the people will learn, how do the people at Heidelberg do things? And of course, even in a better world, or even a good world, people from Heidelberg will come here and we'll learn from them, okay? So this is what we're going to try to do. Of course, we have to convince somebody to give us the money to do it, but hopefully that'll happen. And then the last thing I want to mention is, so the last thing we had in the strategy was sort of a catch-all. Tell us about the next big thing that's coming, right? We always want to know if there's a really new technology or something that we really need to know about. Tell us. So this time last year, that was AI. Okay, and we did about 35 or 40 various consultation sessions. Even if we didn't ask people about AI, they told us about AI. It was actually quite amazing. What is absolutely staggering is sort of that was probably July, August last year. The pace of change in that space is absolutely staggering. Okay, and so we have to be part of it. We have to be engaged in it, and our best people have to be part of it and engaged in it. So, I don't think there's any doubt that AI will change the landscape of research in the future. And as I said this morning, I'm optimistic. I hope it'll be for the better, but it's absolutely critical that we are engaged in that and, use our engagement to deliver really positive outcomes. So this is one of our current greatest challenges, to make sure that AI delivers many, many positive outcomes for us. And I think it will. But, we can't sort of pretend it's not going to be there, because it's going to be there for sure. So I'll finish there. Thanks for listening, and if there's time, very happy to answer any questions. Thanks.